Welcome, folks. Thank you for your patience this morning. We have a full house, which is just so wonderful to see. You are in Montana ICWA Community of Practice. This is our 8th meeting, and we're so excited to have our two special guests, Sherry Fremont and Vivek Sankaran, joining us today. My name is Ashley Chamey McNeil. I have the lucky position to be the facilitator for this community of practice. Um, and I recognize several of you. So it's really fun to see some familiar faces and really exciting to see some new folks joining us as well. So what do we do here at our community of practice, right? This is a kind of purpose statement and a statement that this community drafted for themselves as they were starting to come together, right? And to convene. And so this has been about a year in the making, but the purpose of this community of practice is to foster meaningful, culturally humble collaboration among people involved and affected by ICWA, and to preserve and empower Indian families and their connection to their culture. So we come together every other month under this guise that we are a learning community rather than a working group, right? So there isn't necessarily a big set of deliverables that we're always kind of tasking and oriented toward, but rather a set of principles, right? And kind of like guiding stars, if you will, that bring us together every other month. So this is a quick kind of rundown of some of the things that we keep in mind as we design these meetings of practice together. And today I just wanted to highlight for you that one of our core principles is around gathering to share learning and create new knowledge for folks, right? To take back into your local domains, right? And this fits perfectly. Well, the guests that we have here who are going to be sharing their insights fits perfectly around this kind of core principle of a community of practice. We've had quite a journey, right? So as I said, the purpose and the mission of this community has been articulated for quite some time now, and it was the germination of this community of practice. So this is our 8th meeting. We've been going for over a year. And you can see kind of how we have scaffolded our learning and our approach to thinking about how to do ICWA work and empower Indian families. So today, it's pretty simple. It will take a little bit different of a format than some of our other meetings, which is a little bit more participatory and interactive. And so we're just going to dive right into our session. Sherry and Vivek are going to be co-presenting together in kind of a conversational style. After they have presented, we'll have the floor open for questions, ideas, ponderings, right? We invite you to both speak out your questions, but also as they're presenting, you're more than welcome to utilize the chat function. And as ideas and inquiries are coming to mind, go ahead and drop it in chat, right? And we'll be monitoring that. We have a lot of folks here today, so we'll make sure that we try to group some queries together and cover as much ground as possible, all right? And then we'll be closing. So for everybody, most of us are in Montana, of course, today, and so we'll make sure that you are totally done and able to wrap up at 10:30. Okay. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Brooke, who's going to introduce our guests.
Good morning, everyone. I am just so incredibly thankful, and I know we all feel so fortunate to have Sherry and Vivek as guests of our community of practice today. And I just have to say, I'm really proud just looking at all of these numbers, because it tells me that as a community, we care about this subject matter, compassion. And so I think that's wonderful, and thank everyone for attending today. So I'll jump right in so we can hear from the experts. Sherry Fremont is an attorney and dedicated advocate for compassion and systemic improvement in the child welfare legal field. Sherry is the managing director of the Judicial and National Engagement Consulting Team at Casey Family Programs, where she works with judges, lawyers, and national partners to promote best practices and gold standard principles for supporting children and families involved in child welfare systems. Sherry also serves on the board of directors for the National Association of Counsel for Children, contributing her expertise to national efforts aimed at enhancing advocacy and outcomes for children. Her work emphasizes safety, cultural humility, and a critical examination of traditional practices in the legal field while also advocating for better integration of human-centered skills like trauma awareness, bias recognition, and compassion. Sherry is a proud tribal member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians and serves as an associate judge for her tribe. Her leadership reflects a deep commitment to supporting not only families, but also the professionals who serve them through improved workforce development, retention, and trauma management. And finally, I just want to recognize Sherry's and Casey Family Program support of our ICWA courts in Montana and for lending us her talented staff so often. Casey Family Programs is just a wonderful partner, and I don't think Montana would be where it is without your support. So thank you, Sherry. Next, it is my honor to introduce Vivek Sankaran, a clinical professor of law at the University of Michigan Law School and a leading voice in child welfare reform. A 2001 graduate of Michigan Law, Vivek has dedicated his career to advocating for the rights of children and parents in the child welfare system, with a focus on improving outcomes for families and fostering better decision-making in juvenile courts. At Michigan Law, Vivek directs the Child Advocacy Law Clinic and the Child Welfare Appellate Clinic, where he guides students in representing children and parents in trial and appellate proceedings. His work has led to significant contributions, including cases argued before the Michigan Supreme Court and a range of publications addressing key challenges in child welfare policy and practice. Beyond his academic role, Vivek works with national organizations such as the American Bar Association and Casey Family Programs and provides trainings across the country to improve child welfare systems. In 2009, he founded the Detroit Center for Family Advocacy, one of the first programs to offer multidisciplinary legal support aimed at preventing unnecessary foster care placements. His work is widely recognized, including being named Michigan's Parent Attorney of the Year in 2011. Most recently, Vivek co-edited the first national book for family defense lawyers and the third edition of Child Welfare Law and Practice, a widely used resource for legal professionals in the field. And finally, I just want to give a shout out and a huge thank you to Lisa Woodward, who is an assistant public defender with the Family Defense Bureau in Great Falls. She so graciously is the person who connected me initially with Vivek. And I really wanted to give her the honor of introducing him, but unfortunately she had a court hearing that couldn't be continued today. With that, please join me in welcoming Sherry and Vivek as they share their perspectives and expertise with us today.
Thank you, Brooke. And hello, Vivek. Good morning.
Morning.
I'm coming to you this morning from Oregon, so I'm not at my normal space, so I don't have all of some of the books that I like to bring. So I just want to put that out there that I'm up here in Oregon right now. And Vivek is in Michigan, I think, right? Are you home, Vivek?
I am
Yeah.
home in
How are you today?
I'm okay. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I think that like December is a great time to step back and kind of reflect on sort of the work, the why, the sort of where we need to shift our priorities. And so I'm really excited about talking about these things.
Yeah, same. I'm here during the holiday season, and so this is my my hometown. So spending some time with some family, some friends, um, kind of always traveling, but it's kind of nice to spend some human time to time with some people. So hopefully, we can spend some time thinking about the critical impact and goodness for our hearts, souls, and brains when we're spending time with our people. So we had some pretty detailed introductions, but I think we should maybe mention why we feel like we should be on screens talking about compassion. So Vivek and I don't remember exactly the journey to how we found this course, but Vivek and I began a journey exploring compassion as a brain science together a couple of years ago. And we found a course through Stanford School of Medicine and learned a ton about brain science and some of the skills and practices. And I call it now a little bit of a philosophy, but it's really a science. So it's a both of how these researchers and studies can help us all think about the ways we can take care of ourselves and be nicer to each other and ourselves. Um, when we first started the course, Vivek, do you remember I think we were talking about it, and I was like, I think our main thing was, I think when you were talking about you wanted us to be able to have more compassion for women and families, and I was like, and forgive my language here, folks, because it's my authentic experience as to how I approach it. I was like, I just want people to not be such dicks, like, and so don't be a dick was kind of like, and to me that means like jerk or a-hole or whatever, and that was my entrance into like, that's what my mission was, and I thought we were going to learn about professional civility and stuff. So what about you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this journey's been interesting because for those of you who know me, like I started as like the lawyer's lawyer, right? I came to law school and was trained in law school to like use my brain to do stuff, right? And I loved the art of lawyering, the reading statutes, cases, making arguments to court. Never thought for a minute about anything related to sort of compassion and the human element of lawyering much during law school or in the years after practicing law in the Children's Law Center in DC, where I represented kids in DC's foster care system, because I was really focused on just being the best lawyer that I can, and I was really narrowly focused on sort of the things we traditionally attribute to what lawyering is, which is again using your brain as much as you can. We don't talk about emotions much and connection in law school spaces. But I think for me, over the years, there's been this like lingering frustration that what we're doing as like legal professionals and broadly as child welfare professionals is missing a key element, both in terms of how we treat and talk to ourselves and how we treat and talk to one another. Because we're so focused on the cognitive part of our job, which is kind of the checking the boxes, making sure we don't make a mistake, and a story that I have that was really instrumental for me was I was representing a client in an appeal, a mother whose rights were terminated. Her kid was in foster care, and we had filed the appeal. And a couple of days after we had filed the appeal, the prosecuting attorney called me up and said, "Hey, I have bad news. Your client's child has died in foster care." The child the kid, it wasn't intentional or anything like that. It was a medical condition. Kid passed away, and my heart sort of stopped for a second. I said, "Well, you all will. Someone from the agency will let this mother know, my client, 'cause I don't know her that well. Let her know that her child has died in foster care." And the prosecuting attorney said, "Of course." And so I spent a couple of days and didn't reach out to her because I wanted to give her some space and the opportunity to learn this from someone who was closer to her than I was. And then I picked up the call because we had some things to chat about, and I also wanted to offer my condolences. And I started the call with, um, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And there was just this long, and I'm actually sitting in the office right now where I was having that call, and there was
Mm,
just this incredibly long pause, and the mother said, "What are you talking about?"
mm,
And I said, "Well, I'm sorry about the loss of your child." And she said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And it was at that moment I realized that the system, no one in the system had taken the time to call this mother and just share with her the news that her child had died. Um, and I still remember like the screams in the background. And it was devastating to me to think about. I mean, I still kind of relive that moment. And for me, it was kind of this sign of like we're missing a lot in the work that we do. But it was also this moment of reflection for me that how many times had I missed these things when I was representing children, when people were in pain and I didn't respond because I was so focused on the cognitive aspect of the job. And so that's kind of what led me to this journey. Although, it's funny because for me, the journey started with really this outward focus on addressing the suffering of others and trying to sort of spot it. But the more I do this work, Andy in the chat puts that it's all about being healthy, whatever it takes. And I actually think that's a great pivot and a great place to start because I actually have recognized that the work starts with myself. And the work starts with sort of really understanding the way this work is impacting me and being kind and compassionate to myself. because that's kind of the floor for me to be able to then be in that space with other people. And so that's kind of how I got into this space, Jerry.
So I remember when we started, you absolutely were like not um, focused on the self-compassion pieces. And I remember watching you and going through that with you and through the course and everything else. And but now to see you embrace it and see the connection's been really cool. So we've been kind of on this journey to try to find it and a way to share it. Um, so when we were thinking about like, how do you think the field of lawyers and folks in child welfare, caseworkers and judges and are doing? How do you think we're all doing like as a group? Like when I talk, I guess I don't like the word wellness, but how are we doing as human beings?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer, and I'd love for you to jump in as well, is not well.
Hmm.
I mean, wow. So Raylan put in the chat before I could even say it. We are tired.
Yeah.
And I think that I mean the both anecdotally we hear that quite a bit, but also the statistics show that, right? About
Hmm.
the levels of burnout. In Michigan, we're struggling to attract new lawyers who want to do this work. Um, One of the things that Sherry and I have had the chance to do is hold these compassion retreats, which is really where the hard work happens. These are just these conversations are great, but it's just the entry point. But at these compassion retreats for judges, we focused on. We have this um, exercise we do where everyone writes down on the on marker pads like the burdens they are carrying, and I've done this with my law students as well, just to get real. And there has not been a session where at the end of it we're not all sort of in tears
Yeah.
because we are all carrying so much, right? I even think of
Hmm.
my week right now, right? As I present to you, I'm carrying sort of this burden of having an in-law who is at the last stages of her life, and I'm, drained emotionally. But how often do we armor up and pretend, right, to go into these spaces? And then I think of so many of these attorneys out there and child welfare professionals are operating in islands, like they're in silos. We've normalized, especially in the legal profession, that we don't talk about emotions, that emotions are weaknesses.
Yeah.
And then you combine that with the fact that so many of the folks out there are solo practitioners who don't have a community of support. They don't have anyone
Yeah.
to talk to. And then they get home, and oftentimes, and I mean, I'm one of these people. I don't like talking about my work with other non-lawyers who don't do this work because you get a lot of pity of like, oh, that's got to be so hard with folks who just don't understand what it's like to represent people who are going through incredibly challenging times. And so that though leaves it with we don't have much space to process it, a lot of this. And so I don't know. I mean, what are the things that jump to your mind when you're thinking about sort of how your own question of how we all are doing in this space?
There's been so many studies in the last couple of years that really, so data is always kind of interesting. There's no doubt we're not doing well, right? A large proportion of us are experiencing mental health challenges like severe anxiety, general anxiety disorder, some depression, and the epidemic of loneliness, right? There is a national epidemic of loneliness. And man, loneliness is not about taking some time for yourself. Loneliness is a way you don't want to feel. It's a form of suffering, right? And I know for sure that a former colleague of mine, when they took their life 2 years ago on Thanksgiving, and um, I feel like it isn't just the work; it's also all the other difficult parts of life that he had experienced and who knows what else, right? But the idea that we don't make space for our own emotions and processing and connection, for one of the main reasons I think is that because it's not as bad as what the families are going through, or it feels like we would be comparing, right? And and also this professional conduct code, this culture, or this, I guess, yeah, code of like it's just not okay to do that. And by doing that, we're just suppressing and doing some really serious harms to ourselves. And when I think about when I see bad behavior, what feels like people just being mean to others, the pivot that I think has been the most cool is like, for me, is to say that person isn't just a jerk, that person is not well, right? That person that is being mean to me or to the judges, or a judge is being mean, they're not well. They're overwhelmed, and their brain is responding in ways that this just kind of compounds. So it's just so needed. Like, when I think about from my role at Casey, like what we could we be coming around and talking about, Brackeen, or the impacts of, this kind of statute and this kind of statute? Sure. But to me, this piece is so key of helping us stay healthy.
Sherry, how do you think about one of the things that oftentimes when we're dealing with child welfare professionals, we get is this idea that, sure, I'm struggling, but I'm not homeless. I'm not going through my clients are in such deep struggle and deep poverty and have experienced so much more than I have that I should just suck it up because
Yeah.
you hear that quite a bit, right? Like, and
Yeah.
I
Like, you're like, how
heard,
dare I? Yeah.
yeah,
How
how
dare
it's almost
I?
like an
Yeah.
indulgence
Um,
almost, right? To be thinking about this.
Well, we every single one of us as human beings have one brain, right? So every single one of us started experiencing life, I say, like in utero, and some of us were even, well, all of us, in my view, have been impacted by the experiences, the choices, and circumstances of our ancestors and all this stuff. So we didn't necessarily choose all the things that happened to us. But empathy as human beings allows us to see other people's suffering. That's a natural human experience. And so we're absorbing those things. And then, so when we're around a lot of those folks that are experiencing suffering, all of us have it. So our brains, whether or not we can do this comparative hierarchy of like who's suffering more, um, it doesn't make sense in our brain, because the reality is no human being is what free from suffering at some point. Like, maybe you and I live lives of privilege right now, but you're going through anticipatory grief, right? You're going through, and yeah, we don't have a longer, maybe, like, I guess, home, shelter, food, connection, but when we're around it so much and we don't take time to protect our brain from like becoming overwhelmed by it, we become, well, burnout, right? Or exhaustion. So we must appreciate our humanness, our the ability to what that those emotions and feelings are doing to us, or we won't be able to meet it. And I think another risk of that piece is, for me, and probably a lot of folks on this call, a lot of us had really close experiences to the experiences of these families. And so if we came from poverty, if we came from families that experienced a lot of these things, um, there's this risk of saying, well, I got over it, right? Um, so it's complicated. It's really complicated. But the reality is, if we don't honor the things that are happening to our brain, it's going to come out somewhere, and it's not going to come out in a good way. So it's, it serves us all better if we can pay attention to those, and listen to our own minds and see where it's going,
Yeah, I
I
think
think.
I mean the thing that I would add or build on is, we've all been around uh, other professionals who have not taken care of themselves, and we've seen the impact that that has had on systems, right? I think that we have a Court of Appeals judge in Michigan who I think is really struggling with substance abuse issues and mental health issues. And I remember having an oral argument before her with my student, and my student just started talking, and she just started screaming at us. And there was nothing. I mean, I am one to admit our own faults whenever we make a fault, but there was nothing objectionable about this and about her argument. And we just started getting yelled at, and it was a great example for me. And I've seen this over the years many times with professionals. Of that was just someone. I think you put it that really well. Was someone who was unwell in that moment and who had not taken care of ourselves. And so I think I come at this at several respects. One is this idea that. Um, as a human being, we have a right to ease our suffering, regardless of what that suffering is, or to work
Yes.
towards it. And so, like for me, it's like a full stop. For those of you, in the space that are tired, sad, depressed, like whatever burdens you're carrying, I don't think we need to justify why we want to end that suffering. But secondly, for those of you who are like, yeah, but I want to make the case as to why I should prioritize it, it does have an impact on other people. How we treat ourselves has a profound impact on the families you work with, the other lawyers you work with, the kids you're raising, your spouse, whoever it might be. And so how might we lean towards recognizing that as a framework to how we act in the world.
So I put in the chat, like, I would love to have some answers from folks. Like, what are those barriers we experience what are the barriers to honoring our emotions, right? So what keeps us from really being aware and honoring our emotions and our emotional needs? Let's see if we get an we have an answer. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I have to what does it
No,
say?
I'll read it. I'll read it out, Sherry. So Kim pointed out that we minimize our needs and our grief to do this work, and how things that losses, like a loss of a family pet, just you feel like there's no time to grieve,
Mm.
and because we all, it's this comparative suffering thing of like it's just a pet, it's
Ah,
just whatever, and so we minimize that. Shame, is something else that
oh yeah, that word is so powerful. Um, Shame is the absolute opposite of compassion, right? There is no way that shame um, ever motivates. And I think that, but somehow we use it from whatever sides of humanity we come from, our cultural backgrounds, etc. Shame is always a negative, yet it is incorporated in so many aspects of our lives. Um, the I made this, so I guess the shame of not showing our emotions. I mean, if you show emotions, I heard an example of a woman who said at work she her child had a serious medical condition and it was very scary and it overwhelmed her at work and she cried at work and she was disciplined for crying over the fear of your child's mortality was disciplined. And I mean, that's not okay. That is not okay. Like, we're still human beings when we show up at work. I'm going to see the selfishness that we could be giving someone else that time and energy. That is so, yes. Oh, that's so sad. Vivek, you mentioned armoring up.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, Ashley's question is so good, which is this question that there's so many different ways that you can armor up and so many different
mm.
manifestations of that. And how might that then impact how we show compassion to ourselves? Um,
I think too in the child welfare space, especially in the social work side and and maybe those of you who are dealing directly with clients, I always kind of leave that space for it's a little bit different for those of us who've worked for the state or the county or whatever, because we often don't have as much direct contact with the families. But at some point, it is natural to start to protect ourselves from becoming overwhelmed with all these sadnesses because so our brain will start going to avoidance perspectives, right? And kind of resistance, whether we're aware of it or not. But thinking about so this is a piece for me. What if we stopped trying to solve everything and internalizing that I should be the one to stop all of this suffering and putting a protection, if you will, around I am just one human being doing my level best and being kinder to ourselves versus the negative self-talk of I should be giving this time to others. I should be doing better for my family, you know?
Yeah, I mean, Sherry, and I think that there was a point in the chat about one of the things that really overwhelms folks, and I see this all the time, which is the insurmountable nature of the problems that we have to confront in child welfare, and I see part of the self-compassion conversation as having a much more realistic expectation of our role within this broader system, that many of the problems that we are confronting and are asked to quote unquote solve are multi-generational systemic policy decisions by our government and by our society. And then we're thrust into what I call as the ER room of court, which is like we've ignored these problems or deliberately for so many years, and then it's like now go solve them. And I think part of for me, the revelation of helping me be kinder to myself is recognizing that I can't solve most of the problems that are before me, but I can within that space still do a lot for families. but it's almost redefining what it is that I can do for families. That and so it's like this finding that sweet spot of not being all like seemingly convincing myself that I'm all powerful, but also not feeling powerless. Because that's
Yes.
there, and it's
I
like, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. One of the principles that we learned, and I remember texting you and like really going, help me understand this, was this idea of acceptance of that there is always suffering that is way beyond our control. And that doesn't mean we don't try, but like you were saying, like, I'm going to be a really good lawyer. So I'm going to use my legal skills to do this thing. But recognizing, gosh, like I can't solve multi-generational trauma. I can't solve that somebody has, a mental illness that is making their life very complicated and difficult. I cannot solve that. Even for the children in care, I can't personally meet all those needs. And that is suffering. That makes me feel really bad. And so I tend to maybe add more to myself. So like if I just worked harder, if I just knew more, if I just, if I sleep a little less and go out there and do it. Um, so we just compound that. So the acceptance piece for me was, if I accept that all suffering cannot be cured, am I giving up? Is it resignation? And the idea that no, it isn't. It's just and I feel a little discomfort using this prayer, but the serenity prayer really captures what exactly that is. And for those of you who are familiar with the serenity prayer, it's really spoken to me. I've been dismissive of it for generations, but then I'm not generations, decades. And then I researched that almost every culture that around the world has a parallel mantra or prayer, or, that um, anybody know what the serenity prayer is? Do you know it, Vivek?
I know of it, but if you were asking me to quote it
No,
directly,
quote it. Come on, right now.
all right.
Just like moot court. Yeah. No, the idea that like grant me the serenity to um change the things I can. Uh no, the serenity to know the things I can change, the courage to accept what I cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference. Um, so like recognizing sometimes I can't fix everything. It doesn't mean I don't want to, but recognizing that we need to be kinder to ourselves, to be like, maybe this isn't all on me. And I think that's the root of compassion, right?
Mm-hmm. And I want to, Sherry, in this conversation, like think about like sort of for folks who are like, there's the one of like buying and getting sort of bought into this idea that this is really important and that we have to start sort of pivoting to making sure that we are caring for ourselves in the same way that we're asked to care for others. Um, and if we have you persuaded that this is sort of something that is a way of being that is healthy and helpful for all of us, like what's the first pivot that people can make towards that, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
want to sort of really elevate Jocelyn's point in the chat, which is really thinking about she calls it recognizing, right? Having these emotions. And I think that noticing is like really the first pivot because I have found that so often I don't even notice the things that are going on inside of me because I haven't been, I'm still building this reflective practice of trying to pay attention to what's going on inside of me. And, I think Jocelyn's point about sort of leaving the bench and going to a new job and then recognizing how stressed, unbalanced, and stifled she felt. And it reminds me, Sherry, you had sent me a story uh, written by an Arizona judge many years ago, where she was dealing with a child protective docket every day for 15, 20 years and got off the bench, retired, when then was asked to serve on jury duty in a criminal case where it was a serious child abuse case.
Mm-hmm.
And she, explained what she does, and she heard the allegations. She explained what she does on the jury, obviously got kicked off the jury, wasn't selected, and then went in the car and just started crying in a sort of an uncontrollable way. And she wrote a really poignant piece about how she had not recognized all of these things that had been carrying inside of her for so many years. And so I'm wondering, Sherry, if you might chat a little bit, and then I can share some thoughts as well about on this noticing piece. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the things that you would encourage people to do who are sort of newer to this process? It's just like how do you pay attention? Like, what do you do? Like, how do you do that sort of self-inventory to figure out how all of this is impacting you?
Hmm. Well, one of the first things before we start even doing that, I would remind people, please don't shame yourself when you go through these like self checks, right? All the things that you might notice in yourself aren't necessarily like your willful choices, but some of the things that, we know we have them. But I think about, don't be mad at yourself if you've done this, but noticing this, um, be labeling people, right? So saying she doesn't even care. They don't even care about these families, or um, yelling or being snippy or being kind of sarcastic or short with one another. Like, is that who you are? Is that who your person is? I bet it isn't. But it's like it's a internalized behavior that's coming from irritability, right? It's coming from frustration. So you might feel it in your body. I always say the biggest clue to me is when I'm typing really hard. When I'm typing an email really hard, I know I'm not okay. This is not the right moment. But also, maybe you just feel your heaviness in your body when you're maybe walking with more authority, like you're sort of stomping. You feel it in your voice. It gets tense. It's up a few octaves. But the other side is true too, where you shut down, where you're just not responding. You're just sort of I guess, kind of going into a shell, and other people are now thinking that you don't care. Is
Hmm.
that what you mean too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and people on this call might have, and if you do, share with us a sort of a mindfulness practice as well to get really good at paying attention to some of these physical manifestations. There's a million ways to do it, right? People do traditional meditation practices. Um, Many people do journaling practices, just taking a minute, 2 minutes a day typically the beginning of the day or the end of the day, just to like see what's going on in your brain and see and again, these are all things that I had not thought about. Therapy has helped me quite a bit.
There,
Yeah,
therapy, 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 therapy.
to have somebody and really I'm so situated in the legal profession, but because that's who I am as a professional identity. And we have to get the stigma out of these things, right? The idea that going to therapy, meditating, believing in compassion makes you somehow soft. And so, the things that my go-to are things like therapy, things like meditation every morning for 10 minutes to see if I can get myself better at noticing when things are in my brain. Things like journaling for a couple of minutes, just about things going on with me, but also like the good and the bad, and recognizing that joy and pain coexist all the time, and
Mm,
how
mm,
often we as lawyers and I actually so when I was struggling with anxiety, 5 or 6 years ago in a bad way, one of my colleagues said, well, the reason you're anxious in some ways is that as lawyers, like you're a really good lawyer and we're trained to catastrophize and trained to predict bad things and trained to fix things. And we're given this illusion that we have control over everything in life
yeah.
and we can
Hmm.
make bad things go away for our clients. And you've gotten good at that. But boy, when you apply those same concepts to your individual life, then then it's really hard because those realities don't exist.
Mm. Um, so I'm going to put a vulnerable story out before we answer Andrew's question and Ashley's. Um, the so I'm here in Oregon. This is where I grew up. There's a lot of there's a lot of things here for me, a lot of experiences, etc. So for the 2 days before I was coming, I was noticing and that in the past maybe I wouldn't have noticed this, just like an anxious energy around my kitchen, around my kids, around the way I was responding to stuff, and just kind of like I call it the list, like blah. But I was on the plane coming here and I could still feel it. And I was like, I'm gonna just be kind to myself for a minute and say, what's going on? Like, and then it's like, of course, this is giving me nervousness and anxiety and, you know, memories and things. Of course that is. So of course that's okay. So taking the time to give myself some self-talk, like, you're gonna be okay. You're an adult, you're safe. There's a lot of love here. You're safe. And like, I mean, this is a therapeutic response that I've had to learn, but just being able to be like, it's not normal, or I guess it's not healthy. It doesn't feel good to be stomping around my kitchen and like being kind of a spaz when it's really like a nervous response. So that's kind of just the idea of just like being nice to ourselves. So Andrew said, what is the problem we are trying to solve? Humanity? No. Suffering, right? So compassion in this context, the way that Vivek and I are speaking about it is the desire to alleviate suffering. And I think in order to do that, we have to talk about what does it mean to be suffering. And, I have a working definition that is because it's not every bad thing. It is, feeling the way you don't want to feel. What do you define suffering as, Vivek?
Oh, I think it's the pain that we carry, and I think it's up to you to sort of figure out what that pain is. Uh, but it's more. I mean, I put it in the category of sort of enduring pain in some way. So something that's
Mm.
the everyday slights that you encounter. Um,
I think about embarrassment as a really interesting form of suffering, right? So, like, nobody wants to be embarrassed or lonely. Both of those things are really tough human experiences. And if I use empathy and humility and want to help somebody alleviate that, to me, that's the compassion side, being motivated to reduce someone's suffering. But in this context, not the idea that I can heal the world, right? So I think about the easiest example for me is when you see somebody get embarrassed, what can you do about that, right? And I mean, it's different in all different contexts, but uh, and the other way to think about it is this internalized compassion. How can I be kind to myself in a way that can deal with a feeling I don't want to be feeling right now, right?
and
So
I
I don't
want
want to be embarrassed. So
and I
is
want to
that
think
how?
about yeah, I want to think about sort of Andy's question because I think it's an important one, which is sort of this question of what's the problem or the question that we're trying to solve, and I want to sort of get at it, sort of. Do a little backwards design to try to answer the question, which is like we're all in this field because we want to help families, stay together. We want to help children get back to parents who are in foster care. We want to address the needs of children. And I feel like the system for so many years and today tries to get at this question without actually acknowledging the pain that the people within the system are carrying every day. We try to get at it with legal solutions. We try to get at it through, the court hearings and where we just run through what do they do? What compliance with services do they do? It's a very, anyone who's spent, hopefully you're not in these courts, but I am in courts like this, which is it's very sort of rote. It's very tedious. It's very, mechanical and perfunctory about, how do they do? What do they comply with? What do they and what I think so I'm now convinced that unless we get to a deeper level of connection amongst all of us
Yes.
and a deeper level of recognition of the pain that even the parent who's done the worst thing to their child, they are carrying so much on them and I think of a client who left her kid home alone because she was out drinking and getting herself drunk. And kid enters foster care. And I got this case on appeal, and I'm just reading the transcripts, and all it is about, well, did you refer her to treatment? Did she go to treatment? Did she test? And at no point in the process did anyone stop to say, I am so sorry that your husband just killed himself. And that's what led you to this. Because we're rolling, we're going. We
Yeah.
got 15-minute court hearings. We got
hmm
lawyers who
hmm
have 300 cases. And what I think compassion has gotten me to do, and it doesn't take as much time as one might think, is to hit the pause button and recognize that unless I pay attention to that mother's suffering, regardless of what she has done, and I get it that we have this like primal like nature to react to the allegations of abuse and neglect. But if
Yeah.
I want to do my job, I have to acknowledge what is going on with the human beings before me, and then to work back then more for me to get in the right place to be able to do that, I have to be healthy. I have to
Yeah.
recognize how where I'm at in this journey. And
Mm.
so my hope through all this work is not to minimize like the sort of the legal, quote unquote, legal aspects of our job, but maybe to start making the argument that making that legal decision about whether reasonable efforts have been made and talking about that in court is maybe a little less important than actually connecting on a human level to the people
Hmm.
for us, because that's what's really going to drive people to heal themselves. I don't know, Sherry, what do you think?
Yeah, I I resist the idea of viewing a compassionate act as transactional, right? So I don't want to think of it as like, I'm intentionally just going to do this thing. So I'm thinking of it as a way of being, right? Of how to like think about, maybe I just have to know there's a lot of suffering and be more intentional about what is my role, what can I do? And it takes a lot of humility. And I think that that's a key piece of the compassion definition for me, is that it's empathy relating to how those folks are feeling, but humility, and let them tell us what they need or what that suffering is, right? And that part is so important to me in the child welfare space, in contrast to the concept of like benevolence, but we can come back to that. I was thinking too about what you just said about connection and authenticity. So we can be performatively kind, we can performatively listen, right? So I can sit here and nod along and like maybe even repeat a couple of the words you said. It doesn't mean I truly was deeply listening to you with the to listen as opposed to listen to respond. And listen versus listen to
Watch this.
respond gives me the possibility to like really have some human connection with that person and the benefit we get from that. So I'm a huge advocate of therapy, but therapy is a little bit different than this human connection of authenticity. So if I'm hurting, I don't want to give that to the client. I don't want to give that to the client. But it doesn't hurt me to say, just so you know, I too am having a really stressful day, but I'm going to do my best to be here. But put them on a little bit of notice. I'm not saying overshare, just to say, let me know if I'm not listening to you. Let me know if I'm not connecting well enough. Because I think that performative space of can do more harm than good when we show up and be like fake, what do you call it? A little bit nice. I think we need to be aware of our authentic self, as opposed to just like going through the professional codes and the professional motions, if you will.
Sherry, what about the question that was asked in the chat by Ashley as well, about sort of like specific concrete examples of either a time you've witnessed compassion, uh, experienced it. I can think of one where a uh, a judge, an incarcerated parent was brought into a courtroom, and that parent had just their child was just born, and the Department of Corrections would not allow. They had a policy that you had to, even though it was a nonviolent offense, there was really no reason to cuff the person. They insisted on that, and the foster parents were in the room with the child in the back of the room. And a lawyer, took that child, and the judge had described the story, and took the child and almost moved the child to a place where this parent could see their child for the first time. And this judge, who was at one of our retreats, sort of described this as just the look on this parent's face of someone taking the time to do something like that, for them to be able to see their newborn child, really had a profound impact, not just on the parent, but on a judge themselves. But so, and I'm going to drop in the chat box a video that I show. So, like, what we're giving you, I think, today is just a really quick sort of overview of some of the, like a kind of a
Yeah.
smorgasbord of topics. But I want to share. I'll put a video in the chat of a judge, Patricia Clark, who was passed away probably 7, 8, 9 years ago, in King County in Seattle. And there was a great documentary called Tough Love, where she was the profiled in it, and she has this like a minute and a half clip where I just think she does a beautiful job of exemplifying what compassion looks like in action. And as a parent who shows up to court and basically hasn't done anything, and just the way that she takes it from that moment to really connecting with that parent on a human level, and using that minute and a half to form that connection and use that as a foundation to say we got this and we will do this together, to me is something that has stood out as sort of almost a exemplar of like what the little things we can do to make a difference.
Mm.
What about you, Sherry?
Well, when she's talking about like, have I experienced compassion to myself? I mean, from others, has somebody shown me compassion? And yes, and I like to think of it in the small things. The small thing. I think as a parent, right, you can be out in the world engaging with your kid who's maybe being difficult. And the slightest compassion to me is the I guess the supportive looks from a parent in a grocery store who's not looking at like, why would you bring your kid to this grocery store? But was like, I've been in your shoes. I've done that too, right? Or they don't even have to say it. Or having a tough day at work and being on and feeling teary-eyed, and a coworker sees that and doesn't come in to try to solve it, but literally just shuts my door for me so that I can have that privacy and a minute. Or the small things is to me the I try to be aware of the small things. I don't always need the full response, but just to be gentle and give small kindnesses when you can see somebody struggling a little bit. I think to me, to notice that there's humanity in those smaller things is important to me. I like this question about how do we encourage people to take the time to hear from each other. So uh, one, I think if I would encourage people to read more of the burnout studies or the research that is clear, and we can send more resources around that. But we also have to model it. So there's good research that talks about being vulnerable with your coworkers and your staff. I'm not talking about the oversharing, but being honest and authentic about ways that you're self-caring. So creating a culture in which we do that. So when I take leave from at my work, I tell the team, like, I am taking these days off to be with my family, to do these things, or to rest, because gosh, this can be really hard, right? And it doesn't mean I don't care. It doesn't mean I don't have anxiety that some of these things might not get done in the way I would want them to be done, but I have to do that so that I can be fully present and in a better way when I'm here. None of us do well tired. When we're tired, none of us do well. I mean, that's just brain science at work, right?
And Sherry, what are
Um,
you, I know our time's getting a little limited. What are you, as you think of the medicine, right? And you've
mhm.
hinted about this sort of at various times, for those who are thinking about how to, pay attention to how this work is affecting them and things that they're experiencing themselves. What's some of the medicine that you've seen that has worked for you and for others to do this?
Okay, thanks. First of all, I want to just be transparent that I have used therapy. I have more than, I have a lot of um, human experiences that I've needed to process in a healthy way. So I've used therapy, and I've also used medication, actual medication. But when I think of these other medicines, the medicines for the brain and the soul, I think about the most important one. Well, I would say two. One is breath. We can spend a whole session talking about the importance of deep breathing for ourselves, but human connection, the medicine we get from being authentically connected to other humans, particularly in this space of a loneliness epidemic. And the medicine, if you will, or the prescription is to have at least one human being that you can be your authentic self with a reciprocal and affectionate engagement. And affectionate doesn't mean like the romantic affection. It just means I feel safe, seen, and kept by this person. It doesn't have to be 24 hours a day. It doesn't even have to be that frequent, but you have to have one person. The human brain needs to feel connected to another human being. And so I encourage us all to cultivate and be patient with humans so that we can appreciate that. So to me, that's the first medicine, human connection. And there's tons of research around this point. um, and then, well, what do you, what's your thought about the human connection side?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that when I think about connection, both with ourselves, so I think connection is both connected to yourself, right? So
Yes.
that starts
Mm-hmm.
with sort of the noticing, connection with others, right? Whether that's friends, family, community, But also the word proximity is one that is something that I've read so much about from like Brian Stevenson, Greg Boyle, who runs a gang intervention program in LA. That it's not just about being like connected. It's about sort of authentic, high quality connections that often comes with being proximate. And so is really sort of having that group of folks who you can be your true selves with. And then also, I mean, our conversation, I think, is shifting both between us as professionals, but also and what we do for ourselves to enable us to go out in the world and serve others. But also, I think about that outward work that we do with others and this idea of proximate, right? Which is that how often do we feel like we're proximate with the people that we're serving in our systems, right? We
Mm.
represent clients, when we are, caseworkers. Do we really know human beings on the level that we probably need to in order to actually do the work that we need to do? And you see the examples and the models like, the homeboy industries and places where they're really successful in reminding people who like former gang members and all that who they are as human beings. It's all about meaningful, authentic connections.
Yeah.
I see the work that we're trying to do in juvenile court. And sometimes, again, I'm hoping it's not the case in Montana, but so many places across the country, it's almost like an illusion we've created that we're actually going to be able to accomplish what we intend because there's no meaningful connections here between anybody.
Mm.
That parents are leaving the systems and kids are in the systems without knowing their lawyer well, without knowing their caseworker well, without knowing their judge well. They don't get to see their family that often. And then we somehow expect people within this system to heal. Um, we're setting ourselves up for something that is not going to be successful. And so, how might we change that? How might, right, in terms of how we have not just connection, but really high quality connections.
So you and we're both advocates of the work from Kristen Neff, and so that's Neff. There's her first book that I use a lot is called Self Compassion. She has a whole website and some podcasts and amazing resource for this. But the second one that I would love to share out right now in December, as we're in the holiday season, is the book we've both been reading by Stephen Petro of The Joy You Make, and how joy is an important medicine for the brain when we're hurting or when to balance out the pain. So what did you learn what did you think about what joy is after kind of using that book? What does joy mean to you from that book?
Well, I love he has this like analogy that like so the difference between happiness and happiness could be the brownies you bake for yourself, and then you enjoy yourself, and joy is sort of the brownies you make for someone else and deliver
Yeah.
it. That joy is something that is much more enduring, that it can exist even in the midst of sadness, right? I mean, again, just to to share my personal sort of anecdote is like during this week that has been really tough for our family because we're about to lose a close family member. There's been tons of sadness, and I would never describe what I'm experiencing as happiness. But boy, has there been joy in this week. So much joy of watching friends and family reach out to us and connect with us and offer to help. And like it's a reminder of like that
Mm.
we hope to build in our lives. And so I think that the book was really helpful for me to try to, again, reprogram my brain to
Hmm.
spot joy when it's happening, because I think so often we miss it.
So it's like joy isn't necessarily a state of being, like sadness or happiness or even loneliness. Joy is more like this, like quick dose of something good that you can feel grateful for that gives you a little like boost of goodness, right? So like I would love to have some chat here of like, so I'm thinking I'll list a couple of ideas. Um, a private joke you have with a friend and like you can just make eye contact around it and like just make a little smile, like that's joy to me. Or I love to see like amazing Christmas lights. That's joy to me. A grandfather grabbing his little granddaughter's hand to help cross the street, joy to me. Like what things can we observe or experience or notice that can give us tiny doses of joy right now in this season at this time that can be medicine for all of the suffering and tough stuff we see. If anybody could offer in the chat just a brief example of something good, you know, doesn't have to be a whole story of like a happy ending. It's just like, what are the tiny pieces? One of the things I liked about it was when he was saying how important it is to hear your own name by people who care about you. And I was like, wow, we forget about that. Like when we walk into work and could say, good morning, Vivek. Like I see you, I notice you, I acknowledge you, I'm grateful for you. So
Yeah, I love some of the comments coming in, like going to see our kids at the end of a hard day. Joy is a state of mind, not an emotion.
yes.
Uh, Getting time to visit grandparents who raised me every weekend. I love that. Have a beer together and shake a day. Um,
Yes.
Getting to spend time with them at 87 and 84.
Yes.
Uh, Joy equals sitting on the beach, and work phone is in Montana, and I am not. 20-second hugs.
Oh yeah.
Um, just so much, right? So this past weekend, we got to celebrate my mom's 80th birthday party, and for me, joy was the fact that she didn't know we were coming, and seeing the look on her face, and seeing her break down in that moment, of
Aw.
all her grandkids and all her kids and in-law and spouse, they all like, and just that moment of like, this is what it's all about. This is the kind of joy's kind of the special sauce that holds it all together.
I'm here in Oregon to help my auntie through a surgery, and I got to her house, and she had put out a candy bowl full of Skittles, which she knew was my favorite candy. And I was just like so touched and just like, she sees me, she knows me, she made this effort, and it's just like, you know, so sweet that somebody did that for me, like a little Skittles thing. It's just like so much joy. Like that's just so cool, right? So I think yeah, me and her have been grieving together over a deep loss. And yet she made this little effort. I mean, to her, you know, and so I just taking the opportunity to appreciate the good things is a medicine we cannot underrate, right? And I think I love it when people will connect it to their senses, like the smell of, you know, nature, the smells of maybe my auntie's house always smells like, you know, her house. Like, I don't know, I can't even describe it, but it's comforting to me. You know, sounds that she makes, her laugh, you know, her little, just her expressions and her things, like just seeing the joy and connection in humans and people.
So Sherry, for the one of the things we often hear in this space is time famine, right? That for the professional who is um, feels starved for time and is overworked and doesn't have time at home, doesn't have time at work to do the job that they want to do, what do you say to them about how to make some of these pivots that you're suggesting in terms of how we approach the world?
That one's really hard because you know, we cannot make more hours. We cannot help the fact that we have expected demands. But I think we can share community about, and I don't, I'm like advocacy here about we need to be healthy and we need to have boundaries. And we didn't create this system. I don't think anybody on this call decided that each of you are going to have this many families with this much court or whatever, um, or that much driving and that much, you know, and just say, this is beyond what I created, but I am going to protect myself and model that and hopefully build allies and create a culture in which we do value our human selves. With one another. And you know, I would love for us to pledge that to each other. Like, it does not mean we don't acknowledge and want to alleviate so much suffering. It's not like I'm going to say they don't deserve it or I'm not going to commit my time, but I'm going to be honest about my individuality and my ability to influence it. I mean, whatever version of the serenity prayer that would resonate with you, like really appreciating that as a tool. Like I have to be charged, and I know that can be a little bit of a cheesy metaphor, right? But it's absolutely true. And at the end of our days, like if by chance tomorrow's our last day on this planet, you know, how did we cultivate the ability to be truly present and offer love to the people in our connections, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know if
Yeah.
that's even helpful, Vivek.
No, I think it is, and I know we want to sort of turn it back to Ashley and others to open it up for questions and conversation. But one of the things to think about, especially in this era where there's sort of rapid technological advancements, with AI and other stuff, that I actually think one of the things that excites me is that my hope is that it will open up some space for us to have more time to do these things that I think are um, the bigger impact items in the work that we do that we've often overlooked because our time is consumed by other things. And so the other thing to think about also is that a lot of the things that uh, we're talking about doesn't also take that much time, right? So I mean, because
Yes.
I think as a professional, you need to figure out like where and how much time you have to spend. But like even acknowledging and looking at someone and seeing them for who they are, while they sit next to you in court, and the gaze and the conversation and whatever it is, can make an important impact on the lives of others. And so, really, I mean, I think there's so much. There's a book called Compassionomics, which looks at studies of compassion in the medical field.
Yep.
And it's pretty remarkable that even like and like we all know this from our own personal experiences. Like when a doctor talks to you and looks at you in the eye and treats you with respect and says, like I think of it in my own life when like I hated flossing growing up, and I finally had like a hygienist like looked at me and like was compassionate and was like, you know what, like let's talk about how we might be able to work together to get you to start doing this. It was like, oh, maybe I should like. It was a totally different thing as opposed to the judgmental
The
person.
shame.
Yeah, and so
Oh,
those little moments, the research has shown can have a huge impact on on getting someone to treatment, to stick with the medicine, whatever it is. And I think there's a lot of analogies to the work that we do. That little conversations, showing people that they matter and show them sort of that you care about who they are, can have a profound impact on what they do
mm.
on in their space.
My last comment before is if we can give a generous interpretation of suffering to others and to ourselves, we can also give a generous interpretation of their doing their best. And that piece is really hard to give to ourselves. So with a generous interpretation of suffering others, we're like, they're acting bad, but I don't think they're just a bad person. There's something underneath that. But that second piece of, I think this is the best that they have today in this moment based on their brain right now, to do that to ourselves too. Be like, in the end, I'm doing my level best. And I'm not going to shame myself and say, I should do more, I should do more, I should do more. I'm doing my level best, and I'm going to be kind to myself about that.
Yeah, and I love this idea that if we moved away from this notion that there are bad and good people and pivoted towards there are healthy and unhealthy people who may have committed acts that were like, how
Yeah.
might that change how we approach it? How might that change our curiosity about the why? Right? So if you get it from good and bad and you move to sort of that person's not well right now, well, why aren't
Mhm.
they well? Will that open up then
Yeah.
a conversation that gets us to actually do some of the deeper work that we need to start getting people and restoring like who they and helping them recognize like who they were actually meant to be as opposed to discarding folks by labeling. The label, I think, lets us off the hook, right? In a way by saying that they're just a bad person. Like, let's move on. And I mean, I say this to
We're
my,
just a human.
yeah.
We're just a
Yeah.
human. We're
Yeah.
human. Yeah.
So,
Ashley, what do you need from us? What would we like to hear from community?
This was so beautiful and wonderful. I just was scrolling through the chat and just, folks's own kind of insights and responses and questions. And so I just want to like thank everybody for showing up in this way too. And like engaging is really special to see as we close out the year. We have like maybe a hot second. If anybody has this burning question or thing that they want to like speak out into this space that we're sharing today, or insight, you're welcome to do so. Give that a moment to percolate.
I think it would be interesting too is what's any of these, like, if we just kind of we sort of popcorned over a bunch of topics today. We really like to see like what interests, what lands that people would like to go a little deeper on, potentially in like small groups sometime or with more resources or suggested readings.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And also we'll be, disseminating some of the wonderful resources that have already been dropped here. But Sherry, what you just said actually is like this perfect kind of segue. One of the ways that I like to close out like a time that we spend together when there's just so much there, right? When there's so many ideas, so many maybe different nuances to a topic that you've already been wrestling with. Is by this kind of like collective exercise of what an educator that I work with calls what is your piece of driftwood, right? So hang with me. I was trained in literature, right? And text, and so I work a lot with metaphors for those of you who have hung out with me before. This is not new. But imagine, if you will, that like, you're having a beach day and you want to just kind of luxuriate and revel in the beach. And then that sad moment when you have to leave the beach at the end of the day, right? And in some ways, you want to take the entire beach with you, but you know that you can't do that. And also, if you did, it'd be really messy and be way too much and overwhelming and all those things, right? So instead, what if you got to take one memento, right? What if you got to take one piece of driftwood with you? Then you got to stick it in your pocket and you got to keep it forever, right? And that is the thing that brings you back to the beach whenever you need to or want to, right? So what's that one thing? Okay. So the question then that I think is like just a different way of asking what Sherry just so nicely asked is like, what's your piece of driftwood from our time together today, right?
Mm,
What's that thing that you're going to pull from the beach, right? And pretend that this is all kosher and sanctioned, right? What's the piece that you're going to take home with you and stick in your pocket? And you can drop that in chat if you want. Sometimes it's a word,
mm.
sometimes it's a resource that was shared, sometimes it's a smile that you've seen from somebody else on screen. But go ahead and drop in chat or come off if you want, mute if you want. But what's your piece of driftwood? Yeah, giving yourself grace.
Mm.
Definitely. Yeah. Kindness. Tuck that in your pocket. Yeah. Mm. Coworkers. These small joys, right? One of the things I really appreciate, Vivek and Sherry, is like how you, um, sometimes like given the season and stuff, we see joy kind of smattered about a lot, right? As like a noun, right? As a thing, sometimes as an adjective. And I really appreciate that you brought this down into like what joy is in your body and what it means for us, like more somatically and for our communities, right? So thank you for grounding us, right? In that joy. Yeah, as medicine, totally. Yeah. And that there's good in everyone. April, thank you. Very good. Um, This has been such a wonderful way, and I think a little bit of kismet and delight that we got to. This is our final COP Community of Practice meeting of 2024. We meet every other month, so this closes out 2024 for us. And like, what a way to sail into the end of the year and launch into the new year, right? Vivek and Sherry, thank you so much for joining us, right? And the way that you also modeled for us like just being able to make sense and like dig deeper by connecting with each other, right?
Mm.
Through this topic, but also through exploration of your own experiences and how you try to like wrap your head and heart around these complexities has been like such a wonderful thing that this community is going to bring forward into our practice together and into our learning in the new year. So I just want to say that that's like a really big gift, yeah, and like acknowledge it. So thank you so much. It was great to see everybody here. I want to give a little plug, right? Hopefully you can see this PDF that I just dropped in the chat. If you can't see it or it's being funky for you for some reason, we'll be sure to share it again. But it's a little explainer page of what our community of practice is. And we invite everybody here and everybody who's not here, right? Like this is an open door. There are no prerequisites, right? There are no conditions to joining this group that gets together to learn in community. That's really all that it is. Okay. Um, and so here's the scoop. We meet every other month, okay? The third Thursday at 9 a.m. Mountain. Okay, it's always virtual, it's always on Zoom. So we'll be in touch, and just know that you are always welcome, whether it is next time or 3 times down the lane. Okay. So please help me thank Vivek and Sherry for coming and joining us and being honest and being vulnerable and helping us get through the end of the year with a lot of really wonderful things to think about and a lot of love to carry forward. Okay. Thank you, Vivek and Sherry. Appreciate you being
Thank
here.
you. Yeah. Happy holidays all.
Happy holidays. All right, everybody. I'll hang out in case you have any questions, but thank you so much. It was great to see a lot of familiar faces and new ones. Take good care. Happy New Year.